Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And who is the man behind this channel? Who am I? Well, to be honest, it's not really of great importance, and I'd prefer to keep my identity mostly private, although at this point it's a bit late for that. Big shout out to the news website who published my name. However, it doesn't have much significance in the general discussion because I'm just one person presenting what they know and what they think. And honestly, people behind respective YouTube channels aren't that important in the grand scheme of things. And therefore, it seems so bizarre in a way that today's situation comes across as much more important to many creators than it would appear on the surface. But let's go back to the tea community, because what's wrong with a bit of tea? The tea community has a lot of players in its complex game. Firstly, the large beauty creators who produce content for millions of individuals. This content is fairly unproblematic on principle, but as observed, their demeanour can be quite melodramatic, and there's a reason why the word melodramatic has the word drama in it. Along with drama came people with opinions on that drama, and people who would look at the drama and analyse the drama. Who would have thought? You might even say that some of these channels provided commentary. Now, typically the people who provided commentary were individuals with some level of proficiency in the reporting of this drama. Their style may not exactly be for everyone, but they have an audience, and it seems that many of them are legitimately invested in the outcome of this drama. Many of these creators are quite tabloid, and some are as dramatic as the genre they cover. And honestly, that's alright, as long as people don't come to expect anything more from those channels. That's what commentary is, opinion-based ideas. And if you disagree with that person, that's okay too. However, at the same time, some people may want a more in-depth perspective on YouTube drama. A lot of commentators aren't the most involved in that, and that's perfectly normal too. Not everyone has the time to sit down for a 30-minute summary of something that really isn't the most consequential in their life. Nonetheless, there is a demand, and that demand exists in every genre. So as natural within the beauty community, eventually a channel would emerge with a bit more focus on creating long-form content that focuses on the delivery and the depth of the information rather than merely the gut reaction to it. The channel that appeared to answer these prayers was a creator by the name of Spill. Like the fairly simplistic name, their content never assumes too much about the subjects that they're covering, and focuses more on the delivery of this information in a journalistic and well-cited way, with the conclusions often being well-informed and providing some sort of additional insight. They started their channel on the 5th of September 2018, and in the following year have accumulated a pretty healthy 930,000 subscribers. They often receive praise from many audiences and creators for representing information in an unbiased and thorough fashion. Spill also appeared to be creating this more deeply rooted nexus, which is our word of the day, by the way. This was represented by 3 additional channels: Brew, Grill, and On the Hill, which all have their own dynamic. They were good at what they did. However, perhaps a little too good. In the last couple months, suspicions have been aroused regarding Spill's existence, and if everything is as you would typically assume it would be. What do I mean? Well, as said, many people have expectations for these channels, and commentary channels are typically expected to be a bit more personal, because it's hard to exactly represent opinions of a corporation. With that said, Spill walked the line of actual opinions and never strayed too far from the safety of what they could present as actual evidence. However, some felt that their content, although of good quality, was not what should be representing a community, for reasons that we will debate in due time. A few YouTubers, including D'Angelo and Petty Page, published videos where they expressed concerns regarding Spill's channel origins and the idea that they actually represented this corporatization of even YouTube's most independent genres. Their sanitary, family-friendly nature was somewhat discomforting, and people then began to create further hypotheses about the nature of their existence. Were they being planted by YouTube themselves to deal with these pesky independent creators? Or to create the perception that YouTube is just this squeaky clean platform for advertisers or the media? Given their incredible growth, it was an unsettling thought, and this led many to theorize about the origins of such a channel. Paired with the demonetization and censorship that has been vented by frustrated creators within this community, this led many to believe that there may be a greater agenda at stake. However, with all the uncertainty swelling, Spill decided to explain their origins in a video themselves.
Spill started out as a 2-person passion project. One of us has a background in journalism, the other has a background in illustration and video editing. We both love YouTube news and drama. Who doesn't? We wanted to create a channel that had a more journalistic approach to YouTube drama, a thorough recap of all sides of a story with proper citations. On top of that, we wanted to give something back to the community by contributing to the conversation with an educational approach. Keeping tabs on celebrities and influencers is something many of us like to do. It's a guilty pleasure, but it can get toxic. So that's why we discuss the big issues and open the conversation.
In this video, they state the spill originated as a two-person passion project, which is more focused on presenting drama from a neutral perspective. This meant that often when covering these topics, given the immense workload they would have to go through to create this, when they realized that they were actually ascertaining a significant level of success, they decided that more people would be necessary to help expand on this project. And eventually this led to their own side projects, including Brew, Grill, and On the Hill. Ultimately, the core principle that they started off believing in still stood true. Their commitment to delivering content from those principles had not changed. They note that they have incorporated themselves, however this was only from the perspective that they would have a lot of people and that it was easier to incorporate themselves for tax purposes.
It initially started as a side project, but once Spill started to grow, the team grew too. This way, we can put up more high-quality videos at a faster pace. But at the end of the day, we're still individual content creators who love what we do and are proud of the work we put into our videos. As soon as more than one person is working on a big project together, it's legally the best option to register as a corporation. In Canada, there are 3 types of business structures: sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. A sole proprietorship is an unincorporated business owned by one person, like a graphic designer. A partnership is a joint relationship between 2 or more individuals working on a business together, but each person is personally responsible for profits and losses. The final option, the corporation, tends to be the best option for teams of more than one person because, among other reasons, it offers limited risk for the owners of the company. Basically, you're only on the hook for what you invest in the company, rather than everything you own as an individual. So, for many self-employed people or small businesses, it makes more sense to incorporate for tax reasons.
They provide a few sources that justifies their reasoning and state they have no contacts at YouTube and there's no evidence to disprove this. It all seems very reasonable on the surface, and in a regular, surface-level world, we would be able to continue with our daily lives. But behind the scenes, something was brewing, and it wasn't just tea. Join me today as I tell you an interesting little story about a channel that wasn't quite as crystal clear as they could have been, and exactly why that might have been, and if it even matters at all. But I wouldn't begin to make such a video if it didn't matter, would I? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let us begin. On the surface, it seems bizarre that someone would not be entirely honest about their channel's origin unless they were money laundering or something. So you'd really need the evidence that things aren't as they seem. However, one of the people I mentioned earlier, Petty Page, released another video rebutting this reveal video and presenting some interesting information herself. In her video, she outlines how, in fact, the corporation that Spill appears to be registered under is not their own, but in fact another corporation named AWED, or AWED, whose existence seems to have been conceived around 2013. This evidence can be found on the Canadian website. What makes Petty think that this specific corporation is the one in charge of Spill? Well, there is a lot of considerable evidence relating to the employees, and most notably those who have themselves as working for both Spill and AWED. Arguably the most incriminating factor was the fact that the voice of Spill, a person named Taylor Barrett, had Spill listed under AWED Corp. There was also some pretty compelling circumstantial observations, such as the fact that in the time that Brew was set up, there was a decrease in posting on other AWED-owned sites, such as Good and their relative Facebook pages. That energy must have been going into something. However, that didn't necessarily prove that AWED set up the channel. A few months ago, I covered a situation regarding Smosh and how they were bought out by another network. If that was the case, why did they claim in their video that they had incorporated themselves with emphasis on tax perspectives, rather than just saying they had contracted with the larger corporation?
The corporation that Spill is listed under is called AWED Corp. Now, I looked online and found out that AWED Corp became incorporated in 2013. I even paid the Canadian government to get AWED Corp's certificate of incorporation, meaning that the person behind Spill, Taylor, would have been 17/18 years old when it became a corporation. So something wasn't adding up.
On top of this, the fact that the two people who were alleged to have founded the channel were still working side jobs to suffice income on a channel that could prospectively be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year told people that there had to be some main beneficiary, because it really didn't make sense otherwise. And I'm not one to overstate the potential right now, but these people are throwing money away. But we'll get to that in a bit. Regardless of outcome, whether audit involved themselves prior or after, many believed this would still go against the general tone of their video, which framed them as being rather in control of their channels.
Canadian small businesses who want limited risk need to register as a corporation. And we aren't the only YouTubers to be incorporated. Many other individual creators and small teams are registered as either corporations or LLCs, like Shane Dawson, Simply Nailogical, The Try Guys, and Philip DeFranco. So you can see, registering as a corporation is complicated. You may be thinking, that all sounds really boring. Well, the truth is, it is. Legal stuff is boring, even for me.
Even for you? Are you the one who did the legal work to incorporate? It doesn't seem like it. And I really wanted to give Spill the benefit of the doubt. But this isn't neutrally ambiguous language. If you watched the original video, you received the impression that they, as individuals, started the channel and then incorporated it afterwards, themselves, something that just isn't true. But it wasn't quite over. You see, Spill responded. In a second video, which was much more comprehensive, they open up stating that they did not feel the details they had left out of their original video were completely relevant to the Spill story. And honestly, this video does clear up a fair few things, but at the same time, I think it's right to take a few issues. They follow their intro by showing us a man known as Roland, or as Spill refers to him as the man who made this all possible. What happens next is an inspiring rags to riches story.
So growing up, we were not a rich family. I mean, we had everything we needed, but like any extra toys or games or anything that I really wanted when I was growing up was not something that was easy for my parents to get. So I always felt like, hey, if I had more money, I could just get whatever I wanted, right?
Roland got his first job as soon as he was old enough to work, but he quickly realized it wasn't for him.
But when I got my first job at like 15 years old, I hated it so much. I hated having like a boss, I guess. The first boss I had, it was my first job. He was I just hated working for him. And I remember thinking like, that's what it is like to have a job. But like, I don't want a job. I want to figure out my own things.
I mean, it's very lovely to hear, but it doesn't really change much. Although privilege does pervade the upper echelons of many industries, there are many people with rags to riches stories as well. It doesn't necessarily make you a great person. But good for you at least. I hated having bosses too, but it doesn't make a company less corporate. It's good to know there's a human at the center, but that's also why it can be a problem, and I'll discuss that later. With all that in mind, it's a pretty inspiring story if it is sincere, and I'm happy that Spill has provided Roland with levels of success. But let's get back to the grit. Throughout the video, there is this tone that kind of tries to undercut the notion of incorporating as this fairly normal, regular thing, and it feels like they're trying to combat the negative stigma that comes with the process of incorporation.
The three of them were sure they would outshine Reddit, so Roland incorporated Favorize.
We incorporated Favorize because we thought it was going to be the next big thing, so why wait? Let's just do it right away. We were a team of 3. Obviously, like as a partner, with partners, you have to make sure that everything is disclosed, so we did it. We did that incorporation.
I actually don't think there's a problem with incorporating. If you want to do that, fine by me. But I think the problem is, and Spill knows this, that how people define corporation-run channels is very different to a channel that has been started up by an individuals and incorporated after. Otherwise, they wouldn't have framed it as the latter in the original video when it clearly wasn't the case.
And while a lot of people choose to do creative projects while being self-employed, as soon as more than one person is working on a big project together, it's legally the best option to register as a corporation. In Canada, there are 3 types of business structures: sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. A sole proprietorship is an unincorporated business owned by one person, like a graphic designer. A partnership is a joint relationship between 2 or more individuals working on a business together, but each person is personally responsible for profits and losses. The final option, the corporation, tends to be the best option for teams of more than one person because, among other reasons, it offers limited risk for the owners of the company. Basically, you're only on the hook for what you invest in the company, rather than everything you own as an individual. So, for many self-employed people or small businesses, it makes more sense to incorporate for tax reasons.
This is something that I would say was still dishonest, even with the new information. That's what was relevant to be upfront about. I'll discuss why this distinction is important and how Spill does fall into these traps very soon. But Spill's video is a nice story for the origins of a channel. However, it is mostly about Roland, who as a person, I never had an issue with. I'd rather have a channel like Spill than most. But it doesn't mean that I can't take a fair few problems with their dealings and how they represented those dealings. You can say that the information wasn't viewed as relevant to you, but the fact remains that it wasn't really a case of additional information that doesn't change the context of your channel at all. The additional information here does change the context, but being these smart creators they are, Bill or Roland knew how to embed it in such a load of additional information that honestly wasn't the most relevant. You kind of just forget that they even implied a different story in the first place. It's the polar opposite of going from not enough information to too much information. But honestly, I'd rather have too much than not enough, because at least people with a critical eye can extract the information that they need.
So you can see, Spill and all our other projects were self-made and started from scratch. There was a lot of experimenting before we got to where we are today.
So by the end of this story, I became quite confused by this comment, because sure, they've definitely put to bed some of the more out there ideas that they were funded by YouTube, which were on the more conspiratorial side, and I personally wasn't persuaded by them for reasons that I'll state later. But if you're going to go into depth about all the processes that led up to the creation of the channel and the company behind it, to suddenly say, see, it was made from scratch, guys, seems rather defensive and a tonal shift that hasn't really been earned. Before this video, I had totally accounted for this being a situation, being a possibility, and although I will defend them on some behalfs, I also feel like they're trying to dance out of some untruths and avoid being the center of a discussion that is quite important. What is that discussion? Well, let's go there now. After some deep thought, I really can't buy the fact that they omitted certain details because they didn't believe it was relevant. Obviously, we have the real elephant in the room that was the misleading notion of incorporation. I don't want to go into too much more detail about that, because hopefully it's quite self-explanatory at this point where the contradiction comes. But also the framing of a two-person passion project did irk some people. Now, if what they're saying is true, the people working on this project certainly had an interest in the topic themselves. But once again, that doesn't necessarily undermine all the points being made against them. I would say that they certainly have more character than many of the corporate channels, and to completely say they're the same would be unreasonable. But I'd also argue that there is an element of corporate cluelessness that pervades what they do sometimes. People's concerns about corporations is that given their pre-existing status as a business, they may obtain unfair advantages and lack the genuine investment in what they're doing, and thus lead to takes that aren't in completely good faith, or partially had that. And I'm going to go through all of these factors in this video, but I want to start by focusing on their foundation.
As Roland explained earlier, everything started with one person and no outside help. We had no financial support then, and we don't have financial support now. And yes, demonetization affects us a lot. We make just enough to run the company and slowly grow the Spill universe.
Whether you would consider Spill's channel made from quote scratch, I personally don't know many YouTubers who started their channel on the back of a business specifically committed to that channel with a salary already supporting them. That is definitely the design of a company. For many people, they start making content because they're interested in a topic, even with the personal interests of the individuals in the video noted. The story that Spill tells us, as genuinely told, it is still one of sourcing a channel for the purpose of greater company-based interest. They obviously frame it very earnestly, talking about employee morale.
And I remember going onto the second side of the room and seeing everybody working on good, super, depressed, feeling like they were working on like lifeless projects. And I was like, damn, like that's actually unfair. Like, what if they could also do something they liked?
And although I respect that, I feel that there has been a bit of sugarcoating in the motives here, particularly given in the previous video they had spoken about Spill as if it was the main controlling factor, which seems to be no longer true. And obviously, to take into consideration the fact that other Ord pages weren't the most successful at the point of those other channels starting up either. And I'll talk about that in a bit, but I feel that their story is still rooted in the industry. When people see that, I can understand the concern, and their behavior hasn't exactly embraced the from scratch approach. The individual at the top of Ord, our good friend Roland Umaran, seems to have a history of running these sorts of businesses. He has multiple businesses to do with networking and presentations set up in the past, and it's understandable why someone would want to include his expertise, although some have been more successful than others, but alas, that is the business life after all. I personally felt that whatever had happened, the current setup was quite reflective of corporate involvement rather than the two-person passion project. In fact, in many ways, they were behaving exactly like a corporation. What many of these businesses do, including Ord's Good brand, is that they have one successful page or channel and then begin to extend that brand. That is something they even cover in the video. In Good's instance, they would just stick a new suffix on the end to outline what topic they would be covering. Good food, good gifts, good dildos, I don't know. What they're doing in this Spill universe is much of the same, creating these new brands that are different, but also the same. Same style, same approach, same cross-promotion, and even the same ballpark of personality as they let that hot beverage brew up and talk about the topic that they just can't get enough of. There's something somewhat unsettling about it, to be honest. With that noted, it does seem that Grill is slightly different in his approach, though honestly, I'm not sure if I like it.
Similar, eh? Page, please. Your wig guy might not have seen it, but you certainly did. Don't panic, Jeff, but your pants are on fire.
I personally don't really see the appeal, though it does give me an insight into what roast content would be like if it was done by a Canadian. However, I am sure though I definitely dislike On the Hill, which seems to be the sort of thing that a corporation would undoubtedly greenlight and produce.
My name is Jack, and well, I guess, welcome. I've never done one of these before, but I'd like to do a whole lot more of them. You see, I want to be a content creator, just like my parents never wanted.
They're not doing themselves any favors. I mean, that voice acting. Hello, fellow YouTubers. I do YouTube. My parents do not want me to do YouTube. I am defying my parents. I am definitely a three-dimensional fleshed out character. Did I mention I want to be a YouTuber? Please help me. Please. Also, I really despise, strong word, I know, how all the characters resemble pop vinyls. Pop vinyls are bad and emotionless enough as they are. They're even less effective when you try to actually give them personalities that contrast with that vacuum of a face. I'm going off piste here. What I mean is that it all seems to me, in its current form, to be a bit too corporate for my liking. And I'll go into more detail about that in a bit. Now, of course, it is possible that that behavior has developed from the individuals working with the corporation, and their experience has taught them how to develop such a network. But even then, that doesn't really counteract the other points that have been brought up, and at best, they've omitted information to paint a misleading image of their business. At worst, they've actively lied, but that's why we should move to our next few questions. Why would they? Would anyone have cared if they were a corporation? Would anyone have cared if they were working for a corporation? Should anyone have cared? Well, these are all interesting questions, and I want to talk about all of them too. I'm going to play you a clip that was found in research for another video that isn't happening now, which is a great shame.
It's unfair to even consider T-Series a big YouTuber. And this has been a huge problem on YouTube for so long. Corporations and businesses essentially taking over YouTube. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with businesses being on YouTube. It's smart. YouTube is a huge platform. Why not take advantage of its insane reach? Plus, as a fan of TV shows, I really like being able to rewatch interviews, sketches, and performances after the show airs. That being said, the increasing presence of major corporations forces out independent creators, the people who made YouTube what it is today. This has become increasingly stressful for independent creators because they can't keep up with YouTube. That's why we've been seeing more and more YouTubers leaving or going on a break. They're burnt out. And that's not the only discouraging thing. Take a scroll through the trending page. The majority of it is late night shows, companies, and music videos. And have you noticed celebrities are taking over the platform too? It's so smart. Corporations know we love celebrities, so they make stars seem more accessible to us by putting them on YouTube. But in reality, there's a huge production team behind it. So you can see, T-Series taking over as a top YouTube channel is really more symbolic of how YouTube has become more corporation friendly, hurting the independent creators who made it big.
It's not hard to be somewhat amused at the irony of such a statement, and honestly I feel that this is one of the key problems straight out the gate. As said, on principle, bar exceptional circumstances, it doesn't matter the foundations that I founded this channel on. It's the journey that has led me here today, and I'd hope that people would be able to judge me on the basis of that. But if I was to make a story about my origins and I left out certain details that were kind of important and it painted a picture that was very different to the one that was the actual case, then I think people would have reason to feel misled or annoyed. However, it does go deeper than that, because when we create a channel often based off our own personality, we do create a connection, and as a principle, as a case of morality here, I would expect people to create connections off genuine information, off genuine beliefs. Now, there is a stigma around corporations, which we'll discuss in a moment, but I would have rather Spill make it clear what the picture resembles first time round rather than being selective with the information that they presented, especially their channel, which prides themselves on presenting all sides. As a principle, being straight with your audience about such information will follow through into statements on general integrity as they are underlined by the same principles. It's clear to me that Spill were aware of the problems that presenting themselves as more corporate than many assume may have brought. But with that said, I can understand why they may have been hesitant to be forthcoming about that information. Nonetheless, people are persistent twats, and whether you tell them or not, they're going to find out for themselves. So what are the problems? Obviously, there has been a narrative of recent that corporations are taking over YouTube, and that has caused concern within many communities. In certain communities, creators have been completely ejected by the big machine, with YouTube channels like Jimmy Kimmel Live basically monopolizing the YouTube homepage and pushing out more independent creators whose content may be less wholesome or family-friendly, but no less quality in its content. The corporate creators have great production values and everything looks shiny and nice, and people may be distracted by that, but it ultimately doesn't change the fact that the smaller creator with more emphasis on the actual comedy may be a lot funnier and provide audiences with a lot more entertainment. We like to think that YouTube is somewhat of an equal playing field, and although that's far from the truth, it's when creators are just unconditionally pushed with no means to compete that people become frustrated. Understandably so. In their first video, at a certain point, Spill shows a list of videos that were demonetized in an attempt to show that they go through the same BS that other creators do, but none of them are appealed. That led many to believe that they might just have a separate arrangement with YouTube that they're promoted regardless of monetization. But I think it's a much simpler explanation. I think that corporations just don't think sometimes about their monetization status, because corporations often don't think about that stuff. If you've ever gone over some mainstream news channels on YouTube, many videos will not have ads on them at all. And it's not because they couldn't be monetized on appeal, it's probably because they've never appealed them, which sounds bizarre because it's a lot of monetary difference. But for a lot of these channels, it's a publicity game that will ultimately create the most bona fide long-term income. However, that's one of the biggest things that bothers people too about corporations. They can withstand the demonetization BS because they have money and investments elsewhere. With new corporate channels taking the place of independent creators, it gives YouTube grounds to roll out harsher demonetization prerequisites because corporate channels couldn't survive that while still being the face of the platform. This has led to a lot of controversy, particularly on certain topics that many feel should be open to independent commentary, and yet many of those topics are so frustrating if you don't have that monetization. Not just on money, but on views too, that it deters the independent creators. It has been researched and shown that demonetization has a negative effect on views, and corporations are a lot more resilient to that system. One of the genres that have been constantly affected is drag content. In fact, another creator, Jake Beyonce, I think it's Beyonce, but with Jake. He was completely demonetized, and without community attention on it, probably would have remained demonetized too. People perceive corporations as having a main goal of maximizing monetary income, as opposed to the independent creator who just wants to express themselves. And although not always necessarily true, and although obviously not done to the most efficient extent as shown by my previous comments about appeals, there are certain factors that do often cause this perspective to be somewhat accurate. Emphasis on this somewhat. The problem is that we don't want a creator's opinion to be based on the amount of money it can make them. We want a creator's opinion to be based on what they genuinely feel at the time, whether that feeling is popular or unpopular, well backed up or far-fetched. When they put up videos that they hadn't even appealed to the sentiment of, "Hello fellow YouTubers, It is unsettling. Now, I'm not saying that Spill is exactly stating the most monetarily popular option or even pandering. In fact, I'd argue that they appeal less to people's reactionary emotions than many other channels. However, if they're willing to bend the truth about some of these matters for the sake of their own reputational protection, some may say, well, what else could they be influenced by? And that's the thing about corporate involvement, vested interest. It's the same with politics. It's the same with mainstream media. People aren't saying what they genuinely think, and I understand why that bothers people. The corporate takeover of YouTube isn't just about corporations competing with creators. It's about how sanitized many of these creators appear because they know they're appealing to the YouTube guidelines to gain a foot up, while still trying to maintain the masquerade of relatable creator things. This is what frustrates me because I like what Spill do. In many ways, I don't have a problem with them having ties to corporations because I know that a single person really couldn't do what they're doing, and they are filling a gap that no one else has been prepared to fill, which is why they're probably doing so well. However, they have to be aware of the fact that they're in a community that values being upfront about those ties rather than actually not having those ties, even if those ties have some stigma, because it underlies a greater integral principle, and that's something not worth betraying, even for the dollar. But let's talk about that dollar and how Spill are kind of messing up too. Spill as a channel is not working as well as it could. And I know that sounds crazy to people because they have gained almost 1 million subscribers in around a year, and after a year I had barely cracked 1,000. But this is one of the greater problems about corporate channels that is overlooked because it's not exactly relevant to the content, but more to the people behind it and the socio-political environment that surrounds it. It seems sad to me that a channel with that many subscribers and views has their main creators, the people who claim to take credit for this production, still on other jobs, still claiming to struggle to make a living from time to time. Now, from the video, Roland seems like a lovely, great guy, and I'm going to assume he is, for the sake of the video. But even with that noted, if he is making the money that he can, and he should, then he could be offering a lot more to his employees.
We're a small group of people without a lot of money or the most ideal setup, space, or tools, but we care about the quality of the work we put out, and we put all of our effort into making sure each video is the best we've ever done.
That is a channel not functioning properly, or a channel where far too much money is going to the top. Now, it could be the case that actually the Spill voiceover and artists don't spend too much time on the channel, but that's definitely not how they framed it, and if they're lying, they're lying. But it also doesn't change the amount of wasted potential that is occurring here. They are not just behaving like a corporation in how they create this network of channels, but they are behaving like a corporation in the idea that they are so distant from the actual sources of income, they only reference it when people begin to doubt their credentials as creators. And ultimately, that's what gives me the opinion that Spill is a pretty corporate venture, because I personally believe that if it had started off as a two-person passion project with a genuine investment, well, they would have been much more familiar with the actual technical cogs of YouTube and how to maximize income, because when you're a struggling student, that sort of stuff matters to you, unless you're really complacent, which I don't think they are. They're probably lovely people too, but I have to stress, you're missing out on a lot right now, and you're definitely worth more than the payroll that you're on at this moment in time, because people value the voice of the channel. That's the other thing about corporations. It's just people placed here and there, and they generate income for the person at the top who owns this idea, but that person at the top may not necessarily be that familiar with the inner workings of YouTube channels. And it's soulless and can be often quite inefficient. Spill barely has any alternative social media presence. Their Twitter is a wasteland. They have 6,000 followers for a 930,000 subscriber channel, and their posts are basically restricted to video publications. There's no additional attempt to branch out any personality. Their channel doesn't have any linked social media accounts. They have merch, I think, stickers of sorts, but they were a task to find. Looking over their videos, I think they've only done a few sponsorships in the last 6 months. 2 with Skillshare and 2 with Clue, which, considering their output, content, and popularity, is strikingly low, especially given how tight on money they frame themselves as. Their last sponsorship was over 3 months ago, and since then they've uploaded almost 30 videos. Sponsorships for a channel that size could easily equate a month's salary. They might have their reasons, but it seems like a missed opportunity. How people expect these people to be in contact with YouTube when they can't even contact Raid Shadow Legends is beyond me. I understand why I might not get many sponsors, but I still receive offers, and Spill are much more advertiser friendly. And once again, I stress, if this is a real personal venture of 2 passionate people who are invested in the YouTube community, which I'm more than willing to take on board that it is, you gotta know how these initiatives work by seeing them in other creators' videos and why they would benefit you from taking some inspiration. At the end of the day, one fact we know is that they are currently involved in corporate business, whenever, regardless of the circumstances, and if they are employing people, and therefore they should want to make money not just for themselves, but for the people working around them. These aren't just freelance individuals on one-time payments. Maybe a business can afford that, but a lot of employees can't. They're creating a whole universe over here, but don't have some basics of YouTube 101 down. When corporations don't work best for the people involved, it's not just a detriment to the communities that they identify with, it's a detriment to everyone who is working for them and wasting precious opportunities to do more. And I like to think that the person associated with the delivery of that information and the delivery of those opinions could make a living off that, especially when that's the appeal of the channel. I'd hate for someone else to own my means of production. And that's just a general qualm of why I don't like too many corporate channels, because ultimately their core is so disconnected that even if their content is good, I wouldn't trust it on the basis of credibility alone. Who is accountable when a story is wrong? That's another important reason why people prefer transparency. People want the right person to hold accountable, and that's especially important in a genre like commentary. I think Spill is an interesting channel because although they behave like a business in many capacities, they definitely have more personality than the average corporate channel. And I think that's what's allowed them to pass without scrutiny for such a long time. At the same time, I can understand why this may be more threatening if businesses are now being able to pose as regular individuals, appealing to audiences that previously were beyond their grip, while simultaneously pandering to YouTube's selective algorithms while taking demonetization in places that many other creators could not withstand. I understand why people are worried that eventually every genre will be orchestrated in this corporate way, and nothing that anyone watches will be remotely real. With that said, that's also the detail that has planted a seed of doubt in my mind about the center of control of this channel, because someone like Taylor Barrett must understand the amount of control that she has right now over her character due to that personality, to the point where it couldn't really belong to anyone else. She's in a powerful position whether she has control of the channel or not. I could be wrong, but she does seem to be a pretty integral element, to the point where on the unassuming surface, their origin story made sense. It's just the details didn't quite add up beyond that. It's why I feel it's important to tread carefully here, because although there are clearly some disparities in their story, and honestly content that they should have been more transparent about, they may well be happy with what they're doing and be pretty invested, because they haven't conducted a siege on Roland, and they seem to be on good terms. That gives me some faith in their content. However, it's important to note that they are missing out on a lot of money that could probably help out individuals working for them, and even themselves. There does seem to be this level of corporate disengagement in the way that they behave, and I'm sure that everyone could benefit from some reevaluation of that. And that's all I'm suggesting. Just take a look into it. However, this is a problem much more resident to their actual channel themselves, and not exactly what other creators who are the competitors rather than the employees are concerned about. What threat do they pose in that regard? Well, let's wrap this up. In many ways, recently YouTube has been screwing over a lot of their independent creators who can't afford it, whether that's demonetization, censorship, unnecessary termination. Corporations can afford it. Apart from termination, though, they could probably just sue YouTube at that point. And they can circumvent it in many ways. And we know those rules impact us more than them. I don't think Spill are a plant by YouTube themselves. I'm sure YouTube would give them much easier treatment than the one that they've allegedly been receiving. And honestly, I think a channel like Spill would be a bit of an elaborate plan. I think it's just another company trying to get a piece of the pie, for better and for worse. However, I don't think corporations can ever recreate the sort of personality that an individual in front of the microphone can capture, because it requires levels of consistency and understanding of the actual communities that out-of-touch businesses filled with employees would have trouble capturing. And the fact that Spill tried to spin their origin story in such a way originally is proof that they are not as in touch as they like to present themselves as. And I do think audiences identify that. I don't think corporations can ever wholly replace individual creators. Fortunately, because they don't have a monopoly on the means of production in many genres, a lot of people have access to a semi-decent microphone or camera that will enable them for content creation. That's a strange thing about Spill. Although they could be a concern in that they reflect the fact that a corporate-owned entity has more access to behave in a more human fashion, I also think that underlines their weakness. The fact that the creation of persona relies often so much on an individual that the individual could then just say, well, you give me more control or else I leave. seems to be an important bargaining chip for channels that are more persona-oriented. Therefore, corporations always have to be somewhat restrained in the relationships that they create with their audience, in ways that independent creators can work around. Corporations have to make sure their ingredients are somewhat replaceable, because if the creation of that character comes from anything unique to a person surrounding that channel, then that person could perceptively gain more control than the actual corporation. There's a lot of things businesses can switch in and switch out, but persona is a tough one. Spill does great research and great formulation of content. They have neat animations, but that's not what audiences are looking for alone. There will always be an appeal for people with a bit more sass, a bit more personality, a bit more edge to them. And YouTube can pull all the algorithmic strings to give that sort of content an advantage. But I compare YouTube's behaviors to the metaphor of taking a horse to water. They can put a load of family-friendly, mediocre, mainstream content on people's homepage, but that will not satisfy some. For every Troom, Brightside, Looper, Watch Mojo, there'll be a Mr. Beast and iDubbbz, and I Hate Everything, someone to represent that more organic vision of YouTube. I wouldn't say that they're all tour de forces of personality in what they do, but the connections that they create with their audiences are much more direct and genuine, and audiences recognize that. I think in many ways, that's what people come on YouTube for. YouTube could take away every means of support, and I think we'd find a way to persevere. And although we should always fight for fair treatment, we should have some confidence in our own self-sufficiency. Let's conclude this tale then. I do think it's pretty clear that Spill weren't completely honest with how they presented themselves in their origins, and I do understand why they wanted to downplay certain elements of their story. You know, corporation is a word with a lot of negative connotations within the YouTube community, but all the video did was show that they were kind of out of touch with what the community wanted. The way they utilized certain common creator struggles as ways to boost those credentials felt surface level, and I think if they just provided a bit more context to their story, people would have been okay with that. Instead, it seemed like an attempt to cover up those ties, which led to more anxiety within the community, with people wondering what ulterior motives they had to hide it. I feel it was just a clumsy attempt to retain an image that they may not have earned, though I understand that given the recent situation regarding YouTube's treatment of creators, people may be a bit more on edge. And as noted, it's clear to me that Spill isn't quite as masterful with the game as YouTube as they might appear, and are quite clunky in certain aspects of management, which can have negative effects on their own and is completely viable for criticism. However, with my previous points in mind, I'd also like to say that they might be running quite a good business. The fact that the voice of the channel, Taylor, seems to be happily working on the project despite having heavy negotiating power over the brand tells me that maybe they're just doing something good for themselves and those around them. However, I'd also emphasize that currently they do seem to be a bit out of touch and are probably missing out on a lot of potential income. You can all do better, and if you need any thoughts, my DMs are open. As for the effects on the community, Spill clearly have a way of contributing positively to the discussion, and I really do rate that. It's nice to have someone who uses citations and research to the maximum effect, and there were a couple of instances in the past where Spill were interacting positively with those in the community. But recently, people who've been calling them out for this escapade have been framed more antagonistically by certain followers of Spill. People have been pedestaling them and stating that these critics are just upset that they're not as good or successful, and I don't think it's about that. As stated in this video, I think it's the fact that people feel that their careers are threatened by this empty shell and they don't have the resources to stand up in that capacity. And it just gives YouTube more power to steamroll out harsher changes that don't affect these large conglomerates and create this completely sanitized website. It is a worrying thought. At the same time, I don't think Spill pertain those specific intentions, though it would be cool if they were a bit more involved in the community. I think the alienation has built up some disconnect between them and other creators, which has probably led to this situation, and we don't want that. I don't think audience demand for other people in the community will decrease, and I am hopeful that YouTube will be able to recognize the contribution that independent creators do make and how many viewers they bring in. I think it's a principle of YouTube that they would cripple themselves in attempting to wipe out. They wouldn't want to take that risk, in my opinion. And I don't think there's any way to fully plant corporations in the place of the individual creator, although they have given many people rough treatment of recent. But that's also going to be a topic for another time. For the moment, keep making the content you love and try and be honest about who you are. People don't mind that much as long as you haven't spat on any docs. So yes, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed. My laptop battery is almost dead now and I left the charger upstairs, so I need to get through this as quickly as possible. I want to give a big shout out to my editors who've done a fantastic job. Please go and check them out. They're beautiful people, and I also want to give a big shout out to my Patreons. $10 Patreons are on screen right now. $50 Patreons, Some Hullabaloo, Spectre Angel, Rocket Ralph, Sarah Elizabeth Caroline, thank you so much. And my $100 patrons, Brandon, Adam Michael, and Christopher Carras. They mean a lot to me. You know, you guys are fantastic. Please keep up the great work. If you want to contact me, socials, Twitter @The Right Opinion, Facebook The Right Official. I really need to check my DMs there, actually. I probably haven't done that for a long time. And Discord, in the pinned comment, you can find all the links there. I don't think I have too much else to add. Hopefully, you know, we'll be having a good time when this video comes out. I guess we'll see. But until then, take care, my friends. I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.